Thank you very much. I just want to say before we begin, these are all Biden trials. This is done as election interference. Everybody knows it. I'm here instead of being able to be in Pennsylvania and Georgia and lots of other places campaigning. And it's very unfair. Fortunately, the poll numbers are very good. They've been going up because people understand what's going on. This is a witch hunt and it's a shame. And it comes out of Washington. It's in coordination with Washington, everything, including the DA's office. It's in coordination with Washington. I just want people to understand that this is done for purposes of hurting the opponent of the worst president in the history of our country. Second of all, we have another trial going on right now. That's Letitia James. She campaigned on the fact that I will get Trump, I'm going to get Trump. And it has to do with a bond of $175 million. First of all, she doesn't want me to participate with financial companies in New York. So we have a company, I guess, based in California. It's a bonding company. And I put up $175 million in cash. But she says the bonding company is not good. She doesn't like the bonding company because she doesn't know if the collateral is good. And I put up $175 million in cash, and she's questioning the bonding company. Well, when you put up cash, and the number is 175, which is what we're supposed to be putting up, but I give it in cash, she shouldn't be complaining about the bonding company. The bonding company would be good for it because I put up the money. And I have plenty of money to put up, but nobody is going to be putting up with this. Nobody is going to be listening or coming to New York anymore. Businesses are going to be fleeing because people are treated so badly. It's got to be the most unfriendly place to do business, and that's why businesses are leaving and people are leaving as migrants come in and take over our parks and our schools and everything else. So on the Letitia James case, she's the worst attorney general in the country, by the way. On Letitia, and she keeps a lot of business out of New York, and businesses that are here are leaving, and that means jobs and a lot of revenue. Somebody's going to step in, the governor, somebody has to step in and do something because your businesses are fleeing. But on Letitia James, the money was put up, it's $175 million, and I don't think she's complaining about me for the first time ever. She's complaining about the company, but why would she be doing that when I put up the money? So I just want you to know that that's taking place in front of an extremely crazed judge who's the most overturned judge in New York State. He was overturned 4 or 5 times on that case alone. That's, you know who it is. I don't have to mention names. I want to be nice. I want to be very nice. But a thing like that, and a thing like what's going on right here should never be happening. It's a very, very sad day in America, I can tell you that. Thank you very much.
All I want to say, ain't honestly.
Welcome, everyone. Happy Saturday. It's almost Thanksgiving. My God, this year has gone by so freaking quick. Now, I wanted to air to you guys a video that is not new, right? That is from a while back, I guess. And the reason that I do this is to make sure that the channels that they used and the methods that they used are no longer available to them. Therefore, they'll never know who I was. So I thought that it would be a great time to kind of just show you guys exactly what they're planning for this spring, which they've been planning since last year. I did see a lot of people kind of claim that they have these special Zoom calls. They're bullshit. The ones that we should be focusing on are the ones where they're actually organizing. Most of the people that you see are from different affinity groups that kind of get together and they feel like they're doing something, and they've kind of given old point. It was kind of funny but sad at the same time in regards to news. God, this lipstick is really distracting. My daughter got it for me. It's like the Tilbury, Charlotte Tilbury. It's like really brown. Sorry, I'm looking at myself and I'm like, I don't like it. I thought I'd go with straight hair today. What do you guys think? Anyway, I wanted to talk to you guys about this lawsuit that I wrote, and I want to tell you how kind of that came up. Every morning when I get up, I check my schedule to see what subversives need to be looked at. And I also see things that are going internationally. I know a lot of people just have their Twitter feed, but I look at a lot of things, different things that are happening in the world, because, I know domestic is key and important to us for our economy. We would say our education, our health, but it's actually overseas. Remember how I was talking about the free speech issue and the hate speech crimes starting in Australia weeks ago? I said that is where it starts, and then it bleeds out to the rest of the world. And that is a usual MO of the Crown, right? Because Australia was invented to be a prison. That's pretty much it. So that's how it was founded. The Brits, when they discovered it, they just dumped all their criminals there on this big island. So anything the Crown wants to test always goes through Australia and New Zealand first. And we're seeing it kind of radiate out now to the rest of the world. So this is why I look at foreign policies. But in that, I actually saw where they were discussing the BBC. And in there, they talked about how President Trump is trying to fix things to cover himself by doing pardons, which is wrong, right? That's why I wrote that part 1 article. And part 2, I dropped yesterday after the filing in the case. So I kind of wanted to walk you guys through it in the sense of what I did. Now it's on archive, the Internet Archive. So I will share my screen while I walk you through it. But first of all, let me tell you why I actually filed it. So as I was reading the news again, going back to the BBC talking smack about the pardons, I was looking at the pardons and I was like, all right, well, a lot of these people already lost their licenses, and a lot of them are still in court defending their licenses or just not to go to jail. And I had to make it sure, because I see a lot of people talking about Tina Peters too, like as if the federal government can just yank her out. And it's like, don't be stupid. Okay. There's a difference, right, between federal and state. And this is because we don't want one centralized government. So when I hear people say that, they sound very unintelligent. Also, I find it not honest, the reporting that I see some people doing on Tina Peters, because it works against her, right? I don't like that. So I'm going to leave it at that, because, I feel like everyone's just trying to keep her in. There's delay after delay. And I'm not understanding why no one else is seeing that. And there's a lot of, yip yap in the background about it. But I'm confident in the amicus we filed, and she should be out eating turkey at home. So I'll probably cross my fingers, be able to find a flight to go see her, after Thanksgiving. Just visit her for a day, give her cute handbag for court and a wallet that someone else bought for her. Kind of just see her and hug her and kind of, tell her that I'll be there for during her appeals. The only thing that she needs to work on in the appeals is trying to get it into federal court. That's basically what I've been working on for the past year and a half, trying to find through this muddy and murky, wade of documents of how I can bring it up. And obviously, if this amicus, obviously gets this done, then holy shit, there we go. And why do I say this? This will work the same way with the amicus I just filed in Wisconsin. So I filed it in Wisconsin because I could be pro se. I don't have to get an attorney admitted or anything like that. So that's why I filed it in Wisconsin, considering the same defendants are in Nevada, Georgia, and Arizona. And Arizona has a higher bar, but I know a lot of you like to use AI tools, right? All of you should actually plug in the PDF that's on Internet Archive and ask, Grok to tell you. Grok will tell you my fucking amicus is the fuck lur. In fact, Grok, when I run it through after I write things, I actually run it through Grok and I'm like, yo, tell me what you think. Give it to me like, I'm a 5-year-old. What do I need to change? What do I need to do? It obviously told me that I should have put the Project 65 stuff in there that I didn't want to. And the reason that I didn't put it in there is because it had no place in there. It wasn't beneficial at that point. But the one thing that I did put in the amicus is obviously evidence. And, it'll take care of itself. So before I put that on an analysis, I'm like looking at the comments. Thanks for the skin. Actually, you guys, you know what I do. I don't hate keep, right? I have a great dermatologist. I think that 2 sessions of microneedling have really helped my neck. Thanks for saying. I'm actually wearing makeup today. I usually don't wear makeup, but I do when I'm on camera. So I put lipstick on and my red mascara as always. And, I put some tint. So thank you for that. And it is luminous. You use good, cute Medicube products. I went to say Medicare. Medicube products. And it's, kind of, I found, because as a person, and this is just me as a person, as all of us do, we go through these bouts, of thoughts, emotions. Excuse me. And personally, I find that if I give myself routines for self-care, like mandatory, I tend to be a little bit happier. So that's what I've been trying to implement. So my day and night routine, just dealing with my skincare and combing my hair is really helping. Yeah, I wear red mascara. That's what I'm wearing right now. All right. So let me tell you guys how I came up with this. So as I was reading the news, I disrupted my own self with that. I was reading an article by the BBC and how they said it was a desperate attempt, where they were talking about how President Trump called them out. Well, all he needs to do is pull out Amy Harris, right, who worked for the BBC, who was following Enrique Tarrio around, okay? And she's the only one that the J6 committee was okay with not deposing, even though they used all her equipment. Someone said, do I still have a cough? I don't have a cough. I actually have coffee and I put like my sugar stick stir and I had a little piece stuck in the back of my throat. Just as that I went live because it broke off, from my coffee. So yeah. So that's why I coughed. So I don't still have a cough. It's just, I can feel it that it's stuck there because I kind of like sucked down like my mug. Let me see. Can you guys read it? Oh, there it is. It's in focus. No, it's not. It says, let me check my give a shit-o-meter. Nope, nothing. Love this mug. So, as I was reading it, I was like, they're all still fighting for their licenses. So I decided to read their case. And I was like, and I read the Arizona one. And then I looked at Arizona laws and I was like, holy shit, they're fucked. Because Arizona, for some reason, has the bar really, really broad for intent. So just so you guys understand, they're painting this group of attorneys that after the elections, and this is important that I'm saying this, because you're going to see one of the people that actually co-authored and worked on the document that I submitted as evidence. So after the elections, great legal minds were like, all right, here's how we do it. If we believe that the elections are stolen, we can actually use the Election Count Act and we can put an alternate slate of electors, what everyone keeps calling the fake electors, right? And they're not fake. And I'll tell you why. And that's what I even talked about in my amicus. So, the AGs, for some reason, either need to go back to law school or just are conveniently forgetting that in 1960, during the JFK elections in Hawaii, they actually created an alternate slate of electors. And that slate was actually read in the Capitol on the day. So, That is key, that it was interpreted like that before, and now supposedly no, their intent was to defraud. Well, I'll take it one step further. So I've always said this: when evil comes at you, or where people with bad intentions come at you, key thing you could always do is use their own words and their own playbooks, right? So, I thought, well, hold on a second. They were planning on Zoom calls, and I didn't even attach Zoom calls, right? They were planning on Zoom calls to make alternate slates of electors to challenge President Trump's electors, if the Republicans were to win. Now, in the document that I submitted as evidence, I showed that they too interpreted the ECA Act just like the lawyers did, like Chesebro and Trupis and others around the nation. They interpreted it the same way as the Democrats did. Now, what the attorney generals, who, by the way, partnered with Project 65, right, which had a lot of black money and was chasing attorneys, anyone talking about elections, right? But obviously I couldn't put that in there because there's no evidence, even though there is evidence that AGs publicly stated that they got their information from Project 65 or they were pushed toward that. So I thought Wisconsin would have been the great place to go because, one, anybody can file an amicus, so I didn't need an attorney. And two, if I file it in there, which is the easiest way to do it, they can actually, the defendants themselves, nationwide, can actually use the document. So I was actually quite shocked because no one's talking about this anymore. It's like as if everybody forgot about all these attorneys that got maimed, that fought for us, that stood up for our country. And so it really bothers me when, I see people going about their day acting like they love America, but they forget the people that actually fought in the first place and have been maimed by it, right? Completely. Like these people have lost licenses. They're constantly, getting targeted with lawsuits. And so I felt that I had to do something. So I kind of was like, I was mulling around for a couple days, even though I had my outline ready. I was mulling about for a couple days to see how I could bring in, my cat came, of course, bring in the Zoom calls. So I thought maybe I can put transcripts. Maybe I can, showcase them. But then I thought, wait, I got a document that will not only show the judge that they understood that alt slate elector is a valid thing and that they analyze it, but it'll also show the whole world on the record. How did these guys create this document in the summer of 2020, knowing exactly everything that's going to happen? And why were they so confident that they were going to win with the mail-in ballots? I wanted to put that in front of a court to kind of demonstrate it. So that is, what I wanted to do. One, give them the proof that it's not just them and it's not just Trump people, right? We have the example from Hawaii in 1960, but we also have this document that was then Tom Perez, DNC chair, along with the AFL-CIO leadership and ATF president Randy Weingart. They all kind of worked together to create this document that then was perpetuated, right, through all of these, affinity groups and cliques to be utilized as a template into how to target elections if Trump won. So that was fascinating to just, put it in there, because the judge is going to have to sit and say, wow, they sound really cocky. It's like they already knew. Ooh, how they call it the states. Wait, there they go, talking about the alternate slate of electors. Here they are talking about it word for word. So it's done. And on top of that, obviously, there are Zoom calls where they discuss it. So, and not only that, Congress actually clarified the ECA Act in 2022. So you'll see in my document. Hold on, let me share the screen. Give me a second. So hold on. All right, let me go back. Give me a second. Let me me see. All right. So here's the document. I put it on Internet Archive. Hold on, let me see. How do I do this bigger? Okay. So I uploaded it. And here I said who I was, and I said that the amicus curiae brief I seek to file will materially assist the court by providing evidentiary context that's presently absent for the record. In addition, also, I wanted to say the FBI and DHS actually had documents from 2020 because you know how that list came out of what DHS told Twitter to ban? Well, one of that was Sunrise Zoom calls. And unfortunately, that was kind of like an umbrella of all the Zoom calls, right? Including the ones where they were discussing the election mitigation, what they were going to do, which, by the way, I'm letting you guys know right now, 2026 and 2028 is going to be insane. They have already inserted themselves since 2022 in key positions. So it's going to be, if we don't get rid of these machines, it's game over. I'm just making that statement loud and clear for anyone that needs to hear it, because they've already put out a strategy. We've been watching them. They've been working in the background, even with Biden in office, as you know, for a very long time. And those at high level, and a few of them you're going to see today on this call, it's pretty crazy. So I thought I would kind of just walk you through a little bit of how I decided to go about these arguments, because that's key. So I want you to know that the motion to dismiss to be granted based on the amicus is extremely high. Like, no matter what AI I punch through and it looks up the case, the judge can't ignore the Brady, the yick and woe, and the congressional admission, right? So I put them in a nice, neat package, but by introducing evidence too. And that evidence is key for the other states, because when they go that way, I can have another amicus to file in Arizona and another one in Nevada. And I may have documents in Georgia showing the connection with Project 65, which is pretty damning. So this will be the first hit. Now, prosecution withdrawing apparently is it's a moderate position, because now that this is part of the record, the case is kind of radioactive, because in the case, I actually argue how, hey, it's called the Election Coup 2020. They titled it, not us, right? And it was done under the auspices of AFL-CIO, American Federation of Teachers President Randy Weingarten, and the DNC chair, Tom Perez. So they put it together. Now, during that time, when they put it together, and I was reporting on it and others were, and thank God for the late Lieutenant Scott Bennett, right? I want to say that this document, this task force that they created, and their advisors and their lawyers actually planned for alternate slates of electors in specific states before the 2020 elections, right? Under the same statutory theory, yet they faced absolutely no investigation and no prosecution. And also DHS, CISA, remember how they handled that? That is a cause for Brady, because they already knew about it. So that's basically how I'm coming in, and then I provide the evidence. Like I said, you could file it. You can find it online on the Internet Archive, where I put all three motions, because I had to file in all three cases because they split them up to Cheeseboro, Roman, and Trupus. Now, I say that the court should dismiss forgery charges as a matter of constitutional law. That is how I came out of the gate, and I'll tell you why. So you understand, the attorney generals are stating that these people committed fraud, and that the document that they presented as a slate of electors was a fake document. So they then charged them each, for each signature, another count of forgery, right? So they're calling them forgers and, document, doctors, because they put it in. So you understand why they're getting charged with criminal charges, because a lot of people like to say, oh, it's a criminal charge. And it's like, yeah, but do you know why it's criminal? So it's criminal because the AG is saying, no. Their intent was not because they read the law like that or thought the law gives them that option. their intent was to defraud the public and present a fake document that didn't have the governor's signature, and they gave 11 signatures that were fraudulent, so therefore that's forgery. Just so you understand how the law operates. It sounds ridiculous, but they've got, I mean, you can indict a ham sandwich, really, but this is what they're saying. So I said in my brief here that they need to get rid of it because it's a matter of constitutional law. Like prior to the 2022 amendment, and again, that means Congress actually amended the Electoral Count Act, right? Because it was uniformly understood across both major political parties to permit the preparation and transmittal of contingent elector certificates in disputed elections. So these attorney generals, right, they should get penalized for continuing. So once you see, and mind you, a lot of these cases that Project 65 brought to the table to sue them was done after they corrected the law. So it's like, all right, hold on a second. You've got Congress, both sides that said, yeah, it's murky because the law kind of makes it look like you can give alternate slates without the signature of the governor. So let's clarify the law. So they sat down, they put in legislation, and they tidied it up because Congress themselves validated what these attorneys said, which is the law was read like this. It was acted on in the past like this, right? And so there you go. Now, here's the funny part. Now, when I was going through the AFL-CIO document again, it popped out to me that they stated, oh, this has never happened before. Well, that's bullshit, like I said, and I actually talk about it in this. So in my brief, as you can see, I'm telling them, hey, that Congress already knew, and they subsequently amended the ECA, expressly acknowledged that the statute's prior language was ambiguous and in need of clarification. Third, documentary evidence, including the AFL-CIO's pre-election coup 2020 memorandum, which is incorporated herein and attached as Exhibit A. It confirms that executive leadership of the AFL-CIO, including the former head of AFL-CIO, Richard Trumka, American Federation Teachers President Randy Weingart, and then Chair DNC Chair Tom Perez, along with other Democratic-affiliated institutions and legal advisors, operated under the same statutory interpretation and engaged in identical contingency planning, yet none of them had any comparable prosecutions. And I mentioned that historical precedent confirms that the submission of contingent or alternate elector certificate has long been recognized as a lawful procedural safeguard within the framework of the Electoral Count Act in 1960. During the presidential election contest between JFK and Richard Nixon, the state of Hawaii experienced a recount dispute that left the final result unresolved as of the date prescribed for the meeting of the Electoral College. So on December 19th, both Republican and Democrat elector slates convened and cast competing votes, and the Republican slate, pursuant to governor's initial certification for Nixon, and the Democratic slate contingently for Kennedy. So they had both the governor with Nixon and then just the regular Democrats for Kennedy, right? Pending a judicial outcome recount. When the recount later reversed the initial result, the governor certified the Democratic slate retroactively, and Congress presided over. Vice President Nixon formally accepted those votes for Kennedy, blah, blah, blah. So this is the normal course to par, which means that the AGs know this, but they're trying to paint it. This is selective prosecution, and this should not be allowed. And that's basically what I'm arguing. That for me, it's a concern, because if we are allowing them to do this, right, it's not okay. On top of that, they had this documentation. They had the videos. They were briefed because they were causing unrest with the BLM riots and whatnot. They already knew what was happening. Okay. Remember that big BLM thing that they painted in DC, BLM Plaza, that they named it at that time? It's on the corner of the AFL-CIO. And I wonder when the AFL-CIO actually moved into that building. That would be interesting to find out. But you have to understand that this is how they operate. They're corrupt. They just say things. It's kind of like the way people, and that's why it makes me irk when I remember the sheriffs and police that are supposed to be upholding the law in Colorado talk about Tina Peters the way they did. It made me sick, because I'm like, you should know better than that. You can trump a charge and make it sound like something when it's not, right? And boy, I know I've been on the receiving end of that bitch too. So This is key. So we use theirs and we provided it as evidence. I'm telling you right now, all these suits that I'm seeing happening, even suits that are going to be coming around with these like subversive, you bet your ass I'm going to be coming in there with the Zoom calls and with everything. You know, I know a lot of people are concerned now that Dominion voting was sold to Liberty voting and it's going to go. That's the way they muddle it up. You have to remember Dominion was Venezuelan. That was created an American company. SQL was they sell, they buy, they sell, they buy. It's the same thing perpetuating. We need to get rid of all the machines. But like I said, it's going to be an uphill battle. Your congressmen, your senators, both on both sides, keep in mind, don't want to get rid of these machines because the machines help them decide where they need to go and spend money to convince you to vote for them, or at least make it look like you're voting for them. Because these machines, like I told you, over 5 years ago, were implemented in order for them to know what they have to do in order to maintain the societal peace. They give zero fucks about you. They don't really care if you vote for them or not, okay? They don't care. They really don't. They just want to keep the norms and the image so there's no wide unrest. Okay, let's just keep it that way. Now, today, what I'm going to show you is a call where we have an actual immigrant here on a visa. He's not an American citizen, from what I know, who was brought in from another country. And he's actually working on things. And you have to tell yourself, okay, why is this happening? How is this happening? How are these types of people actually running the show? And it's extremely hard for one to answer that question like straight out, like this is how you do it. But I'm going to try to ease you guys into this. You have to understand that our nation, remember how I always said that woman that took that Declaration of Independence, while the ink was still wet in her hands to take it to the printing press, she sobbed because they were already trying to figure out how they were going to undo this. And the crown is extremely crafty. You know, we had a lot of turncoats and we had a lot of optics of freedom. And I think when our governors sat down back in the day and discussed creating a union too, that should have been an eye-opener. Most of you should actually read history to see how your nation was captured with your consent, but also on purpose in order to make sure that you kind of don't realize it, that you actually think you're free, but you're really not. Okay. So Britain is fighting for their life right now. And I'm really glad President Trump shared the Promethean group. Like, I really like them. And their niche is actually talking about that connection. I'll share that at some point. I'm really glad that he did it. Oh, you guys notice? Yeah, I always do French tips. My auntie told me to get red. I got these. Thanks. I'm trying to switch it up because they're so strong because of the peptides I get. These are my real nails. I don't put fake nails on. So thank you. Thank you. I'm a girl, so I kind of like that. Anyway, going back to it, like the British have a really big problem now in their hands. They're extremely frustrated. The system that they implemented for the European Union is going down. And there's things happening that, I just can't even, Cindy McCain had a fucking stroke in October. She's not even working. And the World Food Program, right, is an American program. And right now we've got this Norwegian fucker leading the place, and he inserted 5 people under his watch because Cindy is sick. I mean, we need an American in there. What Rubio needs to do is tell her that she needs to ask to step down because she can't. But you know what? Rubio is so fucking loyal to John McCain. I kid you fucking not, that he won't do it. So President Trump needs to demand that she step down and that we appoint an American there, because the CCP has already inserted their people. I mean, they're the biggest funder of the UN, but this is an American program. So if an American is not running the show and those 5 people just appointed are not someone that that meet the criteria to serve the American purpose of this whole organization, then they need to go too. And I'm saying this because this is not going to bode well. Okay. And also, Rubio, you got some of your people that are working in Ukraine that are fucking leaking information, because I'm listening to everything that fucking happened when they went to Zelensky a couple weeks ago. So you've got and they're talking in these chat rooms and on the Zoom calls. Like, people really need to understand, how big the issue is. And yes, Marco Rubio has like this fucking loyalty to McCain I can't explain. So, he won't do it. We need someone to make him, to force her to step down. We can't do this. We can't do this at all. So what I'm going to show you today is a call from a while ago, because then they can't tell. You're going to see, I'm putting the PDRN lip thing because I took this lipstick off. It made my lips so chapped, because it's matte. Anyway, I want you guys to listen to it. It's got Aaron Chenoweth, the one that got money from USAID to run a domestic program, get this, under Biden, to include transgender people into nonviolent disobedience, civil disobedience. There we go. Nonviolent protesting and civil disobedience. Now, what you're going to see today is you're going to see the head of the Federation of Teachers, Miss Weingart, who also participated in crafting this AFL-CIO document. You've got Chenoweth. You got some lady that wants to be a priest that works for the AFT. She reminds me of Crockett. And then we have Ivan, the Serbian, whose resume is pretty massive. So before we get to that, I just wanted to say, before we teeter over into that, how important it is that they finally took the bet on the Epstein stuff. And I'm really enjoying it. I'm loving watching it, right? Because I know what happened there. So I hope everyone is ready, because even if they're not, shit's about to go down on that Epstein stuff. And you'll be very surprised. I've said this before, like, Jeffrey Epstein was weird. He liked young girls because he was a germaphobe and wanted them young. Michael Wolff, I wrote about how interesting that the emails are Michael Wolff's, almost like I fucking knew back then, right? But I digress. Here's the thing with the Epstein thing. Ghislaine was really the handler. She was the one bringing the girls. And the fact that they would craft narratives to see how they can entrap him, because they knew he was a threat. I mean, if we have predictive analytics, do you think they don't have access to it? But theirs just kept getting stuck after certain years. Other ones are more advanced, more biologically in tune. Now, what we're going to see with the Epstein files is a lot of big names and a lot of money, but most of it is medical research. Again, do you really think Stephen Hawkins, who could only move like one little pad on his finger to talk, was getting off with little girls? No, he wasn't. Another thing that maybe we might get out of the Epstein files is the submarine island that Joe Biden's brother owns, with Joe Biden flanking Little St. James, that is an active submarine port and a frequenter of having Ghislaine Maxwell pop in. So that'll be interesting to watch. I did watch a little bit of the Hunter Biden interview, just a little bit. That was interesting to watch. That's all I have to say. He took the humane route, and I was all right with it. So let's take a hot minute. Let's shift gears. Let's look a little bit at Epstein and have this nice music, and then let's kick into the subversive so I could tell you who this Ivan guy is. See you in a bit.
I met this 6-year-old child, this blank, pale, emotionless face, the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. devil's eyes.
Welcome back. So let's get into this call. So I kind of tweeted out where I asked DHS and ODNI and the FBI to kind of investigate the visa that a guy named Ivan is on in the United States. Okay, this conversation demands a cigarette, so we're going to be smoking right now. For all of you that have to go outside and smoke, sorry. You can live vicariously through me and watch me smoke. All right, so this guy is a Serbian activist, period. Keep it there. Why am I saying this? As you saw, a lot of conversations are ensuing online. We successfully, over 8 months ago, had the United Nations and other organizations determine that what happened in Bosnia in the 90s was actually genocide. In fact, it was during that live stream where I talked about Mike Lindell that I told you the story of someone that was very close to me that actually survived that war and what happened, right? Now, another thing that you should know is that Serbia, the whole operation there to dismantle Yugoslavia and everything, was done by the Bidens. Now, here's another thing. Remember that picture I showed you? How there is a highway in Serbia named after Biden? Do you remember that? Now, we go back to a report that was just put out how the Serbians were actually bringing in people for human hunting sport. Now, if you remember in the story that I told you about my friend, children and people would have to go through what they called a sniper alley to get food. So if you're 3 days with no food, you're going to run. And snipers would take free shots and people would die just to run and get food. That was a sport. And most of them were children. I already told you about this. Now you saw it come out in the news. So now this is why we're paying back to the Serbian. So he's an actual activist, and he was born in Belgrade, Serbia, right? And he was part of what they call the nonviolent Optor. Optor is what the movement he called. He was huge, and he aided in overthrowing Milosevic in 2000, who got poisoned, by the way. Now, he created Optor in 1998. He was a university student, obviously influenced by USAID, because there's documentation where they actually worked together. I could tell you that. He was studying process engineering. He co-founded Optor with his fellow students, and then the movement emerged like just to, get at Milosevic, who was a king or repressive rule, right? And that included, election fraud that they accused him of and media censorship. And then the aftermath of, the 1999 NATO bombing in Serbia, that hit it off, right? So they started as youth-led initiative, but they quickly grew into a mass movement involving people from everywhere. Now, he used what they like to call nonviolent strategies, like funny street protests, like what they used to do for memes. You know how you see the old people like dancing and laughing and shit like that, or wearing shark costumes, right? So he invented that strategy, or might I say, the people of USAID that aided him in expanding that. use that. And that was actually the beginning of how USAID started to use genuine movements in other nations against the nations themselves. Now, he was trying to mobilize people against apathy. All the messages were there and great, right? Now, there were bulldozer protests. Do you remember that? Like there were elections and then they had protests. And in September of 2000, at the presidential election, Ivan himself became one of Optor's most visible leaders. He organized all the rallies, the marches, the voter mobilization, everything, part of the democratic opposition of Serbia. He worked very close and in tangent with our pockets at USAID. In fact, it wasn't John Brennan, it was Tennant that got with him. I was made aware of that movement only in briefings at the time, and how impressed they were and how they already had their people on the ground working with them and trying to see how they can aid them in their mission to get rid of this guy. Okay. So this guy is a Serbian. He's known to have overthrown governments. He fought election fraud, but yet now he says there is no election fraud, whatever. And he actually basically attempted, he said that Milosevic attempted to falsify the election results. So they created nonviolent protests and strikes, and they stopped coal production, and they completely paralyzed the economy. So by, I think it was like the beginning of October, that's where the bulldozer revolution came, where everyone marched in Belgrade, bulldozers were brought out, that visual, it was his idea. He was like the father of that kind of movement, which was then, built upon. Now, after all of that, just so you know, obviously he worked in Serbia, creating democratic institutions. And then he continued working in Serbia, like creating programs to teach nonviolent resistance and everything. But what happened was he's now serving as the executive director of International Center for Nonviolent Conflict since like 2022. He's been consulting in movements in Ukraine, Iran, and everywhere else. Now, Morovic's roots obviously remain in Serbia, and he actually went to Tufts University, go figure, and got a degree in international relations. Now, you're going to see him talking because he's actually in Virginia, actually having these conversations with people to get things done. And the one thing I have to tell you is that there were a lot of red flags when listening to it. So it was very alarming because he's introduced not just like as an academic, I guess, but as an NGO leader, but as a veteran organizer, which helped, overthrow a president. So, and that movement, like I said, was actually funded by NED and USAID, right? So he's one of their key dudes on this shit. Now, you'll see at some point where they're discussing nonviolent ways of action, and then you'll see him propose more escalated ways of doing it, which is key here. So this call is from 2025, May. I always put out calls in arrears. Like I said, our identities need to be kept quiet. All these videos are already with the FBI from the day they were recorded, so they just keep getting them. This has a chain of custody number as well, with identification of the system, the internet use, everything. So this has been well documented. This video specifically tells you what they're planning, and I really wanted to show it to you guys so you can see it yourself. You don't need anyone else to explain it to you. It's kind of explanatory, self-explanatory. And I know a lot of you say, well, I don't want to watch this. Like, what am I going to watch? Why am I going to watch this person? This person's like subversive. See, that's the biggest problem that we have in society. When we don't agree with what other people are saying, we just dismiss it and don't look at it at all, which in turn causes us issues because then shit happens that we didn't expect, and then we're fucked when we could have known all along. So without further ado, I'm going to play this video. It's 1 minute and 33 seconds long. Go figure with that number. Maybe we can fast forward a little bit at a few parts. But it's key to see these 4 people. And is Chenoweth in Brennan's office? Looks eerily familiar. But I digress on that. Please enjoy this and take a look at what these people who think they know better are saying, not only about our country, but what they want to do. And we've left a really big gap, I wanted to say, in our reporting, I guess, for alt media and for the media. I believe that it's very important that President Trump kind of bring up this whole George Floyd stuff again. And I'll tell you why. It's key. If they're going to bring up George Floyd, we need to make sure that there is consistent reporting in regards to the fact that all these BLM people were arrested for fraud, and how the BLM riots were actually planned and organized, and how many of these politicians were part of it. And the reason I say it is because the new momentum now is to create a George Floyd anniversary. And so you're going to hear about it from the Crockett knockoff. She's like a super Timu version that you're going to see. So I hope you enjoy this segment. It's really important to watch what other people are doing. I know a lot of us, I don't follow people I don't like, but I have a list of names that I just type in and go and look. And this is how you see what people like the Anon groups do. Not only domestically, but internationally, which is extremely key to be understanding where you as a citizen are positioned on a global and on a domestic level. And right now, our international news are telling us a lot more. And I'll recap on a couple of headlines that you've probably missed and didn't know about at the end of this. So welcome to this. It's not so much a snooze fest. Listen to what they're saying. They're organizing under the guise of protests and legitimate. And you're going to be like, well, they're working within the bounds. Yeah, because you can't determine someone's intent. Kind of like the case that's happening in Wisconsin, Nevada, their intent. But obviously from their discussions, you can, yield out what that intent is. But I digress on that too. We need the DOJ to get a little bit stronger. They're in a very good position to do so. So take a listen to the head of the American Federation of Teachers that mold the minds of your children, and then some weird pastor lady that reminds me of a super Timu version of Crockett, and Crockett super Timu too. So that's not a good thing. And then we've got that dude, Erica, like, shit, I thought only Maddow can transform like that, but this is crazy. And then we have the father of overthrowing governments who's on a visa within the United States. Like, how are you on a visa in our country while you're organizing with federal employees and others to overthrow our government? Now, there's 2 things here. One, we're watching the fuck out of him because we can, because he worked with the CIA before, USAID and NED and. So we're watching him and taking all their names and communications. So that's number 1. Or number 2, maybe some people in law enforcement and judicial leadership, and we don't mean the top, because the top people get reports from people below them, right? We're talking top. We're talking like middle, upper level, are probably in bed with these motherfuckers. So without further ado, here we go.
Going to be as vulnerable as I can be. Hello, everyone. This is Randy Weingarten, and this is actually our 3rd webinar this week in lots of different ways. I suspect that there are a couple of people that have been on all 3 of them. I know the staff has, but we kind of saved, even though Ali Velshi was fantastic, and we talked about his new book on Sunday. And even though talking about menopause and premenopause and postmenopause with some fantastic doctors yesterday. Was pretty informative to those who were on it. Today, the topic is not as well, it's really enticing for me. It's not as it's not as joyful or uh, for most, because who would have thought in the United States of America we would really have to be talking about and having a webinar about and really teaching about to all of you non-social studies teachers and to the social studies teachers and to the history and the sociology and the political science professors. You know all of this already, but this is a really important refresher. Who would have thought that we would have to really talk about countering authoritarianism, or talking about it, as we say in the title, how to stop a backsliding democracy in its tracks. But we're doing that because this is real. And this is probably the most important discussion that I've had with people this year, certainly since November 6th and January of last year and January 20th. And so I'm not sure, I'm just going to be as vulnerable as I can be. I am not sure I know how to make clear how dangerous a moment we find ourselves in the United States. Many of us in the US believe in our exceptionalism. And so we believe that we can conquer everything, including this kind of backsliding. We believe that our democracy will never go away. But the problem is we are closer to our democracy disappearing for most people in America than we've ever been before. Some people might argue.
So let me pause. You see this woman on your screen, right? This is Randy Weingarten. Like I said, she aided in crafting the AFL-CIO document that was being circulated. Now, right now, she is the head, she's the president of the American Federation of Teachers. She's talking to your child's teachers. She's talking to professors and teachers. I'm telling you, she's holding this for teachers. These are all your teachers' unions. This is how the AFL-CIO did it. Remember, one of the biggest unions of the AFL-CIO is teachers' unions too. Post office too. Oh, did I tell you that the post office is also holding such meetings? You know, the post office union workers, you know, the ones with the ballots and shit, right? That one. So this is really important for you to pay attention to, because this happened last year. Well, in the spring, and they were talking about the spring that's coming up. So as I've said, this is why I get very irritated when I see people talking about Zoom calls like they know what the fuck they're talking about. Those Zoom calls were intended for people to find them. They were not important. They're not talking to leadership or people that mold the minds of children and other people in the unions. This is the president of the American Teachers Federation, okay? And there's 4 people on this call. You're going to see all 4 of them. I'm going to play it. I just want to point it out because I did cite her name in my amicus. So I thought it would be important to kind of just point that out, that this is one of the women that, well, there were more. I mean, AOC was on the Zoom call where they were discussing, you know, about the elections under the guise of the Green New Deal. Remember, the Green New Deal was actually crafted by these people that are doing Zoom calls. Okay? Crazy ones too, from NGOs. But we're all pretending like President Trump's not doing it. How the fuck is he going to do anything when we're not targeting the right, you know, it's like Hydra. You take a snake out, you've got others. You've got to get to the root of it. I'm showing you the roots. And she better look worried. We want to make her famous. So these are the real Zoom calls to look at, the planning and how they do it. Because a lot of people are thinking, oh, you showed us with the kids and how they sacrificing. How did they do it? First, they have a call with this bitch and all her friends. Then the teachers sit down and convene. Then they create their own little Zoom spaces with your children, either that be middle school or high school and even college. And then they train them to think this way. So I hope this enlightens it a little bit. All right, let's get going.
We're closer to it than since the Civil War. Some people might argue we're closer to it than ever. Some people might argue that unlike our first president of the United States of America, George Washington, who decided that he was a president, not a king, we have a very different president who believes in the maximalist use of executive power. So let me just take one step back and paint a picture, and then I'm going to turn it over to our exceptional panel today who have forgotten more about this topic than I will ever know. And I've just penned a book on this topic that will be out for sale in September. But our panel really knows what they are talking about. So that's the book that I penned. It says, yes, it really does say Why Fascists Fear Teachers, and it is a compilation of the war on knowledge. But the people who are on our panel, we can take the slide down. The people on our panel really know what they are talking about in terms of this moment we're in, and not only how to recognize it, but how to fight it. And so we will tape this. We are taping this webinar, so you don't have to take notes. You have to be engaged. We need our members and the other folk who are watching this. We need you to be engaged, because the one thing we do know is the people united will always be able to fight a backsliding democracy. The people who go onto the streets, if there are enough, will show that our values conquer our fear. But let me just take a step back. Elon Musk announced today that he was walking back from government. He was leaving. He wasn't going to basically try. Yes, we should have a lot of hearts for that. He wasn't going to try and basically buy another election. But he's done a lot of harm. They purged federal workers. He and Doge have operated as an unelected shadow government with limited transparency, virtually no accountability, but maximalist harm. Just ask someone who is alive and a retiree who's been sent a letter saying that he, she, or they are dead, and what they have to do to actually try to recover from that. This was even before the reconciliation bill. Think about what is now happening in terms of weather and how we have virtually no one who is dealing with the hurricanes and the kind of thermatic situations that we have in places like Kentucky just this week. Weather monitoring, FEMA recovery, cybersecurity, water and food safety, and I can go on and on. But in addition to the gutting of the federal service, the gutting of public education, public health, vaccines, libraries, higher education, cancer, Alzheimer research, the list goes on and on. This is all before what they're doing tonight in the Congress. And then the erasure, the targeting of people of color, the smearing people who are not white, who are not straight, who are not Christian, as someone as less than. The smearing and the targeting of people who have the audacity to say something negative or use their free speech rights, like Bruce Springsteen or Taylor Swift, who have said something about this government and they are told that they're going to be investigated. Or mayors, like the arresting of Ras Baraka or the investigation of Brandon Johnson for just speaking their truths. Or now, yesterday, the targeting of Congress people, the exploiting of fear of anti-Semitism to strong-arm universities, the banning of programs that help women or African Americans or other racial minorities or immigrants or transgender people, the attacks on Social Security, Medicaid, public service loan forgiveness, all of which has been earned. I can go on and on. The disappearing of people from the streets, the taking of a mother while her kids looked on, the taking of a father who is sent to a gulag, maybe never to be seen again, a sheet metal or a sheet metal worker, one of our ranks. And this is only 4 months into Trump's second term. Tonight, or maybe tomorrow, even though Donald Trump said today that he does not want to cut Medicaid, they are cutting almost $800 billion out of Medicaid. For what? For tax cuts for the wealthy. So if you're really wealthy, you'll get a big tax return. And if you're not, you're going to pay more money. So the question is not only why, but is there any kind of analog in history? And what does this all mean? And what can we do about all of this? So that is why we wanted to have and start this series. We can call it civic engagement. We can call it something, anything we want to call it in terms of democracy. We've done this in the past, and Erica has actually been with us when we did a Shanker Institute series several years ago, when we started seeing this backsliding into authoritarianism in the United States of America. But people didn't believe it. Even in this last election, people didn't believe it. So part of what we're trying to do as teachers is to actually start thinking about how we teach, how we educate ourselves, and how we educate others in ways that people can hear. Because the fastest way to move into authoritarianism or totalitarianism or fascism is for people not to believe it, or for people to be so fearful that they don't fight it. Now, unions, as well as teachers, have always been on the forefront in the fight against authoritarianism around the world. Unions are laboratories of democracy. We provide a training ground for people to engage in democratic participation, from voting to promoting economic opportunity to peaceful protest. And unions work to solve problems. In the AFT, we call this solution-driven unionism. When we see a problem, we seek to solve it. And you see a chart right now, or a slide right now, about some of the things that we can do to do this. Now, the most important thing I'll say before I turn it over to Erica is that authoritarianism can be stopped. Democratic backsliding can be stopped. But it does come to a trite expression for some, but real for me, we the people. Yes, we have to be engaged in Congress. We have to use collective pressure in commerce. We have to be in the courts, as you know we've been in. But as you've heard me say, for those of you who have heard me in the last 100 and some odd days, it's not just the courts. It's the court of public opinion. And if we are not fighting, first educating ourselves and then being on the streets in a very, very public way, we are not going to win. We fought back in a lot of ways. But at the end of the day, the strength of a movement cannot be ignored. The only way that is not ignored is that people see other people on the streets. The only way it's not ignored is if people are not fearful to join others. So we got to stand up, whether it's universities, courts, Congress, or on the streets in enough numbers over and over again, so it is real and it is seen. And in my judgment, although I learn from the people you're about to hear from, that is when we see backsliding reversed. So, since March, AFT leaders and activists and rank and file members have mobilized in drones. What we did on March 4th was something we had never done before, 2,000 actions for the protection of our kids all across the country. We were involved and engaged. On April 5th, many of our members have been on the streets every single weekend. This last weekend, it was canvassing to stop the Medicaid cuts. It's been for Social Security. It's been for protecting our universities. It's been for public education. But we need to do this more often and in more numbers, that is repeated and where it cannot be ignored. That's why June 14th, we will be in the No King's Day protests across the country. But let me turn it over to the experts tonight, who we are so lucky to have. These are three remarkable people. Erica Chenoweth is a political scientist, at Harvard. She knows political science. She is a political scientist. They have authored or edited 9 books, dozens of articles. Look, Erica, after I just wrote one, I have no idea how you can do so many. It almost killed me. But dozens of articles, 9 books on mass movements, on nonviolent resistance, on terrorism, on political violence, on revolutions, on state repressions, including, get this name because we're going to put some of these in the chat, Civil Resistance, What Everyone Needs to Know, and On Revolution. Erica's current book project, The End of People Power, investigates the puzzling decline in the success of civil resistance movements in the past decades, even as the technique has become more popular worldwide. And along with Zoe Marks, Erica is also the author of the forthcoming book, Bread and Roses, Women on the Front Lines of Revolution, which explores women's participation and how that impacts mass movements. Then I'm going to introduce all 3 of them right now, and then I'm going to shut up. Ivan Morovich, Ivan, I hope I said it all right, is executive director of ICNC, the International Center on Nonviolent Protests, on Nonviolent Conflict. He was one of the leaders of Otpor, the student resistance movement that played an essential role in the downfall of Slobodan Milosevic in Serbia. I'm just going to say Milosevic in Serbia, for those of you who remember. This successful democratic transition in Serbia was not automatic. But afterwards, thank God, Ivan has been consulting with various pro-democracy groups worldwide and has become one of the leading practitioners in the field of strategic nonviolent conflict. He is the author of the book, we got a lot of book writers here, The Path of Most Resistance, a step-by-step guide to planning nonviolent campaigns. And it's available in English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Catalan. And our last speaker tonight is someone, as we are thinking about the 5th anniversary of the murder of George Floyd, is Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould. She is a pastor and an activist whose ministry and community work is rooted in the biblical mandate for justice. I love that. The biblical mandate that moors in the Exodus theory. She is the executive director of Missouri Faith Voices and the pastor of Quinn Chapel AME Church in Jefferson City, Missouri. She's a proud native of Demopolis, Alabama, and an ordained elder in the AME Church. She's an alumna of Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville and Columbia College, and she holds her Master's of Divinity from Eden Seminary and a Doctor of Ministry from UTS, United Theological Seminary. So let me start with Erica. Can you share some of your research findings on what makes civil resistance movements succeed. Thank you, all three of you, for being here.
Thank you so much, Randy. So grateful to be here with you all tonight and with such respected colleagues on this panel. I am here in my personal capacity as a concerned citizen, as a student of history, and as a teacher. And we're gathering during what I see as an extraordinary crossroads in U.S. history. It's a moment in which civil society and civic institutions either push back and defend democracy in the U.S., or the country will careen more deeply into far-right authoritarianism and lawlessness. So the question before us is what can be done, and I would answer with what I think is good news, which is that each of us can do a great deal. It matters what we do, and it especially matters what we do together. We can learn from countries that have come back from the brink some very important lessons. And even though our context is, of course, unique, it's also true that research in my field anyway suggests that in about every major historical example of the past 100 years where countries have reversed course during a backsliding episode or have had a total breakthrough of democracy in an otherwise autocratic regime, it was movements that made the difference. So institutions like the courts cannot save us by themselves in a backsliding episode. In backsliding episodes, the primary problem is that the institutions have either been sidelined or appropriated by the autocrat, and so they themselves cannot provide the beachhead for democracy. Whether we're talking about how the civil rights movement in the US mobilized against the autocratic Jim Crow system of segregation in the South, how the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa created democratic breakthrough against a white supremacist regime, how the Solidarity movement organized and mobilized against authoritarianism in Poland, how Chileans broke through the fear and terror of Pinochet's far-right regime to peacefully force his ouster, or how South Koreans mobilized against a coup just a few months ago. The most important factor is a strong and sustained defense of freedom, justice, and accountability from the grassroots to the grass tops. And I should say labor has been central in every one of the examples I just mentioned. Even when it seems far-fetched, even when it seems scary, it is always a possibility for people to push back effectively. And that's because there's no government, no matter how tyrannical, that is monolithic. Every tyrant or aspiring tyrant is completely dependent on cooperation, obedience, and help of thousands and thousands of people in various pillars of support. And those pillars can include the business and economic community, civil servants, cultural and religious figures, political appointees, media, and security forces that include the military and police. Aspiring autocrats always try to project strength, permanence, and absolute loyalty and fealty. And they do this to try to make people feel powerless, alone, demoralized, and demobilized. But we aren't powerless, we're not alone. Actually, people who oppose oligarchy, lawlessness, autocracy are in the majority. And autocratic power is not permanent. It's actually extremely fragile. Loyalty has to be constantly refreshed and rewarded. And this means that there are near constant opportunities to dislocate the power holder from their pillars and make it harder for them to implement their plans. There's always a spectrum of loyalty and a spectrum of allies for a movement. And the thing that movements do that win is they get just enough people not to cooperate with the power grab. How does this happen? It happens through civil resistance, which is when ordinary people decide to work together in a coordinated strategic way to defend, demand, and improve democracy through nonviolent means. As I mentioned in all of the cases I mentioned before and many others, labor has played a truly vital role. And although not every attempt succeeds, many attempts have been defeated, there are some patterns in what makes these movements successful. I'll mention 4 key factors that can be very useful to keep in mind. The first key factor is numbers and momentum. So obviously movements that win tend to gain more and more participants over time, but they also importantly gain fewer and fewer opponents over time. So the idea is to basically divide and rule the opponent. And focusing on inducing those loyalty shifts and those pillars of support can be a key way that this happens. Labor is essential in this because of the power of labor itself and the ability to withhold labor, because of the moral power of labor and workers, because of the organizing and negotiating capacities that exist in many different labor unions that are hard to come by in other sectors of society, because of the discipline that organized labor often is able to deploy, and because of solidarity across different labor elements of the labor movement, which we've seen in campaigns from the California Great Boycott to the Montgomery bus boycott, and even the March on Washington, which some might remember was actually the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, in which A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin, pillars of the labor movement, were key. In Chile, it was miners who kicked off the resistance to Pinochet, going on strike in a way that actually cut to the core of some of the moral claims of the movement. In South Africa, it was economic pressure that created political pressure for the National Party to unban the ANC, begin negotiations, and approve the country's first ever democratic elections. The Solidarity movement in Poland was literally a trade association that built the irresistible alternative, laying the path for a democratic transition. So the idea here is to just basically get people to move one wedge over, away from the autocrat and toward the movement, even if it's just getting partial sympathizers or passive opponents to become more neutral about the conflict. And that's a much smaller lift than trying to melt the heart of the autocrat. This is not the way most movements win. It's more just by constraining their options and reducing their base of popular support. The third thing that successful movements do is they maintain resilience and organizational discipline, even as violence or the threat of violence against the movement escalates. Unfortunately, most movements that genuinely threaten autocratic power at some point experience violence. And the movements that are prepared for that escalation and are prepared to basically wield their power regardless of what happens are those that are able to sustain and even multiply their impacts in the aftermath of a violent episode against them. And then the fourth thing that successful movements do is they innovate new tactics, meaning that they build on not just methods of nonviolent protest and persuasion, but also non-cooperation and the building of alternative institutions. So I'll close by just making a couple of observations about where this is already happening in the United States. So right now, there's a little bit of a public discourse that there's like no real resistance happening to what's Trump's agenda. And that's not true at all. My team at the Crowd Counting Consortium has been tallying protests every single day in this country for the last 8 years. And what I can tell you is that our latest data show that there are 3 times as many protests that have happened by the end of April 2025.
I just wanted to interject. So I actually had reached out to our amazing guy, Dave Dogsborough, and gave him all that data she's talking about. I have that data. They're actually following protests by city, hour, people, everything. They've been tracking all this data. And I asked him to see if he could put it like in a video schematic. And you'll see that the data that Harvard has been tracking is also showing protests in other countries that are generated from the United States. So you can actually see it. Now, the data set I gave him only had 2025. And I think he was more astounded than anyone when he saw what came out of it. Because I was just looking to get, the document, where it's comma separated values basically, and kind of coordinate it and create a visual so people can actually see how they're tracking their movements. Remember how I told you with the election machines, it's all to see how many people turn up, to be able to crunch the numbers and combine that with social media. The same strategy is being used here. As they're amping up to see how they can cause maximum damage, they need to be able to track to see where they have more traction or where things are going and how they come out. Were they violent? Were they fine? Were they infiltrated? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they've been actually tracking every single one, which she admits here, which has been funded by your tax dollars too, by the way. All right, so let's continue.
As has happened up to now in 2017. So we're well ahead of an accelerating movement that is building pressure over time. The second thing is that we have seen innovative tactics around things like non-cooperation and a new appetite for this. This includes boycotts and boycotts, sellbacks of Teslas, corporate shareholder votes that reject proposals to eradicate DEI, et cetera. And so ultimately moving to the capacity to withhold labor through strikes is something that successful movements do. In fact, the general strike itself is perhaps the most effective method of nonviolent resistance that has ever been developed. And then the third type of sort of category of actions are things like alternative institutions. You might think of this as building beloved community, building a vision for a future that appeals, that is irresistible. And we're seeing the beginnings of that through the development of mutual aid, the organizing of workers who've been laid off, and a new sense of civic solidarity among those who are trying to push back against the backsliding. So there are many, many examples from history and I think from what is emerging in our country right now of people committed to resisting authoritarianism. And in fact, if history is any guide, what Randy said is right, that it's winnable. I just want to close because I saw that poll a second ago about how concerned folks are about what's going on. And there's a sociologist named James Jasper who wrote a book on the emotions of protest. And in his book, he makes the argument that the emotion of fear demobilizes people. It demotivates people and keeps them from participating and recognizing the full scope of their agency. And I think what's really important to keep in mind is that even when things feel very scary, which they often do, the magic combination of kind of mass mobilization is a combination of outrage and hope. Outrage is just a refusal to go along with things that are just downright wrong. And hope is the feeling we get when we know we can do something about it and that what we do matters. And so to the extent that folks can just wake up every day like I do and recognize what's going on, but also tap quickly into the agency that I still have as a person living in this country with the many tools and the many networks that I have at my disposal, that's a good combination, you know, and so I'm hopeful today, even if I'm not totally optimistic, but I'm hopeful that we can do together what we can't do alone, and I am grateful to be in it with you all. Thank you.
Oh my God, thank you so much, Erica, and thank you for sharing the findings. And we have also, again, Erica and they and their co-authors have written several remarkable books on all of this. So I want to go to Yvonne right now, and I just, you know, what are the lessons? I mean, it's just amazing to see you, and that, you know, given who Milosevic was and given what was happening in Serbia, it's just remarkable to have you tell this story. But tell us some of the lessons from Optor, sorry, I can't speak today, and just the anatomy of that kind of authoritarian resistance and the lessons for today.
Thank you, Randy, and thanks everybody for being here today. I'm really honored to be with you all. I think like maybe I should start like how I actually first learned about Milosevic. I was 14 years old and didn't care much about politics. And when actually the authoritarian takeover, Milosevic and his clique took place. And what was interesting, you know, at the time, that was actually very popular. He was very popular, and what he was doing was also very popular. He called it anti-bureaucratic revolution, because of course everybody hates bureaucrats, because bureaucrats make our lives more difficult. And so when he announced that he's going to go after all these bureaucrats as a new leader, everybody cheered. What people didn't realize was that he was going to replace those bureaucrats with loyalists. And these loyalists are going to actually end up not just ruining the country, but actually these loyalists were also and Milosevic himself responsible for the fall of Yugoslavia and the war and the suffering and everything that we went through. But I was somehow shielded from this because I was in high school and then enrolled in the university. And as we started feeling this more and more as young people, and especially the fact that we didn't have many options and that the situation looked very bleak, and we got politicized, I would say an important element in that was the fact that, this was all happening at the university. So authoritarian takeover, when it starts, I said anti-bureaucratic revolution. The first thing is take over the administrative state, civil service, then take over take on political parties, take on different, elements of civil society. And towards the end of that takeover, one of the few remaining institutions still standing is the university. And so this was the case in Serbia in the 90s. And so we, as students, were not just defending university and autonomy and freedom of university, but we were trying to defend some of the kind of basic values that we were taught by our teachers, by our professors, the values of critical thinking, of not submitting to authority, but rather taking the authority of evidence and authority of argument, and not the authority of person. And in a sense, we were grateful for kind of coming of age in that institution of higher learning. And that's why university was the hotbed of resistance. So, of course, Milosevic eventually did try to take on the university, and this is the birth of our movement, of the Otpor movement, which literally means resistance. Another thing is not just the importance of higher learning and the importance of teachers in our upbringing, but also I would like to stress the importance of unions. Unions, especially independent trade unions at the time, were actually very supportive of youth organizing and student organizing. When you're a student, you're trying to organize, you don't have much, but you also don't need much. You need a place where you can meet, and you need maybe like a bullhorn, and maybe you need like some place where you can print flyers. And this is what actually unions in our case were really kind of forthcoming, and they were really helpful, and they understood the importance of supporting youth organizing, and in a sense, really helped us in that first initial phase. So if we go, I will show you some of the kind of pictures from those days. So, for instance, I would say one of the most important enemies in fighting authoritarianism, especially after the takeover actually really becomes prevalent, is not really fear, but apathy. There are people who are afraid, and there are reasons for people to be afraid, but most people are actually apathetic. They think that there is nothing that can be done. And it was very important for us in that stage, when we were still a small student movement before the numbers increased, was to actually shake people out of that apathy, to kind of show that what is happening is something that should be resisted. And this was the days before social media, before, it was the stone age of the internet. So in a sense, in order to kind of draw attention, we need to have very vivid imagery. We had to use street actions that are going to draw attention and to initiate conversations with people. And these conversations were really about the problems that people were facing, but they also led to recruitment and to incorporation of ordinary people into the movement. So in a sense, through that persistent action of a whole cohort of young people, we were able to increase numbers over time, build coalitions, and then create a very wide front that was able to how should I say, mount a challenge to Milosevic in the election, which after losing the election, Milosevic was forced to step down. I would say one more thing. We were faced with severe repression in the process. Not in the beginning, because everybody underestimated, a bunch of kids doing silly actions like the one that is on the picture. But after a while, when Milosevic and the regime realized that what we are doing is actually gaining traction, and that more people are joining, and that not just that they're joining, but there is actually a strategy being formed, and there is a road to transition. The only possible solution that he had was repression. Because of our choice of non-violent method, and because when we were faced with repression, we actually used that repression to show how vile the regime's crackdown was. We actually made that repression backfire, and even more so, it actually shook the trust that the police force had in its own leadership, that ordered them to do the repression against us, and it actually undermined and undermined the loyalty, and actually caused the defection of that same police. So on the day when Milosevic stepped down, it happened without a single shot fired. Nobody believed it. He was the butcher of the Balkans. He was capable of causing great harm. But because all these pillars of support, as we call them, all these institutions that were propping up that regime, they actually switched sides. The transition actually was very smooth and totally bloodless. So if there is a lesson that I can share, is that persistence and movements over longer period of time help with different aspects of the civil society, but most notably trade unions, and young people at the forefront can actually make impossible things possible, and can create transitions that are not even perceived as likely, but it did happen even in Serbia. That is my story.
Oh my God. Again, thank you so much. And I don't normally write a whole bunch of notes to myself during these webinars, because I'm trying to focus on all of you, but I'm writing notes upon notes upon notes to try to actually really figure out, and I want our chatters and the people who are in the listening as well to really think about what are the most important things that we're taking away from this in terms of how we turnkey this into, lessons in our own locals, and what we need to do in terms of the head of our resistance committee often says, what's the 10-minute lesson plan, and what do we do, and how do we put it together? And in fact, I think we have a form about for people about if you want to get involved in this. And we have a form that I think we're going to put up as a slide. I hope we're putting up as a slide in terms of getting involved and getting engaged. And I want to just ask our dear Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould, and I know others will call you Reverend Cassandra, but I know from my wife, who is a rabbi, I always call her by her last name. So Reverend Gould, what you have done so much in terms of both Black Lives Matter as well as the more formal civil rights movement over all this time. And you've been really involved in grassroots resistance in the United States. I wanted to ask you not only to share some lessons, but there is a very I hear it from communities all the time about how tired people are from fighting, and how do we reconnect, particularly people who are the most at risk here because of the erasure of the 21st century that this administration is attempting to do. So preach to us, give us some lessons here. Thank you.
If only I had an energy to preach, but yeah, first, just thank you, AFT and Shanker, and Share My Lesson, Michelle, for the invitation. As I was preparing for this, and I am a preacher, I'm a Black preacher, so I was like, make it concise. One of the things that I have been naming for audiences is that, so yes, there is definitely this rise of authoritarianism in the US, right? Attacking truth, trying to erode civil rights, criminalizing protest in the Capitol earlier today. Because a Congresswoman McIver, is being charged with a felony for allegedly assaulting ICE agent, the mayor of Chicago, for words that were spoken from a church, right? This criminalization of people who dare to resist. Now, some of you might actually believe that this is this kind of breaking news or the rise of authoritarianism. But as a person who is the direct descendant of those who were enslaved in this country, for the average Black person in America and some other people of color, it's really just a recurring headline. It is, for me, living in a Black body with the history that I have in this country, from the moment my ancestors were abducted from the west, from the shores of West Africa, and all of the centuries in between. There has been authoritarianism. There has been those who would literally seek not just to contain our freedom, but to contain our bodies so that we would never be able to access freedom. And so while I actually, I study authoritarianism in Hungary and in all of these other countries, I followed apartheid I still don't buy gas at Shell because I remember my parents not buying gas at Shell because of apartheid. So I've studied these movements, but I really want to situate it as being the seeds being in the soil, mixed with the blood of many, many Black bodies. Long before we were doing hashtags, before George Floyd, before Mike Brown. In the introduction, I used to pastor at Quinn Chapel. I actually am in DC now as the political director of Faith in Action National Network. But in Missouri, when Ferguson happened, these are not like new forms of resistance. These are actually tied back to what Gary Dorian he talks about this a lot. He doesn't call it this. It is the Black social gospel. I believe that these movements are as interconnected to faith. They're as much about faith and a fight for a narrative, a contesting for what Christianity in particular really is, as it is about politics. And in one of Gary's great books, Gary does a great job, in my opinion, of trying to bridge like this academic thought process about movements to the actual streets and those who are actually organizing and doing this work. And Gary reminds us in his book, The New Abolition of W.E.B. Du Bois and the Black Social Gospel, he really takes us back and reminds us of, I'm an AME pastor, of leaders like Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, reminds us of Nannie Helen Burroughs, those who actually challenge not just the state violence, but also the silence of religious leaders and the silence of a greater society, right? Gary also reminds us that Dr. King didn't have any experience as an activist when the bus boycott happened, but he had been shaped and steeped by a Black church tradition that has always found us having to rise to the occasion of fighting and resisting uh, a government that would actually seek to deny our very existence, all while commodifying our bodies and profiting from that, all while having us, in enslavement even after enslavement was legal, so that this country might profit from it. And so when I think of what I am learning and the lessons, I actually have to, it's a Ghanaian term called Sankofa. I have to look back so that I can be able to actually move forward. I have to go back and get those seeds that have been taught to us, even if you're not a person of faith, but those seeds have been amplified. I think I sent you all some pictures. There's this picture of Selma because, and so for two reasons, of the bridge, I'm sorry. That two reasons that I use that picture. I'm born 49 miles west of there, and my mother was on that bridge on Bloody Sunday. But I also don't want us to kind of compartmentalize or bifurcate movement. Certainly eras change, but Selma is as relevant to what we are facing today as George Floyd was 5 years ago. And it is a reminder, as I said in the beginning, of this reoccurring theme in America that not all of God's children are human enough. Not all of God's children are human enough to be free. Some would say what we're experiencing now is this legalized or these attempts to legalize, if we're honest, an ethnic cleansing of America. And those are hard things to deal with. When you talk to organizers on the streets, most of us sadly are able to admit that there is some dead Black person, some body, a literal body, a body, someone that's no longer breathing that actually activates us into this moment. Authoritarianism is violent, and maybe, just maybe, the fact that more people are seeing the actual proclivity toward violence, we might actually move from a moment of allyship to a moment of having accomplices and people being in real solidarity. If there are lessons that I can share, whether it is from the era of Reconstruction or even from this very moment that we are living in now, from the experience, I also had a picture, if you all can share that, of these police in the streets, right? This is what authoritarianism looks like. This is a picture from my own phone because I was close enough to them, right? In 2014, in a residential neighborhood on West Florissant Avenue in St. Louis. This is what authoritarianism looks like. When government actually militarizes folk, there are tanks behind them. When government actually militarizes, I would call them agents of the empire, to actually harm, intimidate, and literally obstruct freedom from ordinary people who only want to live like everybody else is living. That is the picture of authoritarianism. There's one more picture I really wanted you to share, the one where it says they didn't ask us. There was a picture of, there was a particular night on August 15th, and there was a young lady who was trying to when she got to the protest line, there were no tanks out there. Well, by the time the night was over, tanks were there and she couldn't get to her car. And so there was a headline on CNN and the New York Times that said, faith leaders lamenting because of looting. And I was like, that's not what happened. I used that no one asked us because today, even, there's not enough conversation and relationship with people who are on the ground. It is inadequate to study movements and not actually engage in people who are actually engaging in movements in your communities every day because they've been having to fight for their lives. The lessons that I would offer is to not just look abroad, but to look at the blood that the American soil has been soaked with and actually acknowledge and own that this is America. Every time I hear, particularly a politician, say that something egregious happens and it's not America, I'm like, it's the America that I have always known. It's the America that my ancestors have known. 3 lessons. Authoritarianism is also, in my opinion, I'm a faith leader. It's a religious and a spiritual crisis of such. These people are doing this under the guise of some kind of faith, not the kind that I know about. So resistance must also be spiritually rooted. We do learn so much from the labor movement, but right alongside labor, and often even in front of labor, faith has also been a part of these movements. And so we learn a lot from faith lessons of how people of faith have garnered their moral courage and actually resisted. Augustine said, an unjust law is no law at all. Empire doesn't just attack black bodies, but it literally in black, brown bodies, bodies that are not the bodies of white, wealthy, cis gender appearing men. It actually tells black, brown, LGBTQIA plus siblings, it tells us that we are disposable. But it is the lessons from black theology that reminds us that we are all made in God's image. So our resistance, even if you're not a person of faith, has to have some kind of a grounding in something that is beyond a system that determines who you are. I believe that community is a counterpower, right? Community being made, whether it is in a church basement, in a Zoom room, in the park, in community. I just left my beloved St. Louis, where I lived for more than 40 years. Devastating tornado hit. FEMA, nowhere to be found. The governor kind of hesitated before he actually declared an emergency so that the president and FEMA can figure out if it really is an emergency. But the people, there are more than 5,000 buildings, homes actually destroyed. The people did not hesitate. Grassroots orgs have been on the ground. It hit about 2:45 Friday. Grassroots orgs and ordinary people on the ground helping people, put tarps over their roofs, giving out food and medical assistance and etc. Community is the counterpower to authoritarianism. And finally, we don't just, and I am definitely a proponent of non-cooperation. It is how the bus boycott, it is how multiple iterations from, as I said, whether it is from the era of Reconstruction or just last week, it in Newark, New Jersey, when faith leaders stood even after they arrested the mayor and said, yeah, we're going to disrupt business at this ICE plant. It is us not just resisting, but contesting for power. We must contest for power, and we cannot be silenced. One of the main tools of authoritarianism is literally maintaining silence. And a part of how we counter that is to not be silent. Um, I think you, Randy, kind of alluded to like people being exhausted and etc. I know that, you know, there's all of this narrative like, yeah, where were the Black people on August the 5th? We are playing the long game. It's not that Black people in general are not, but there's also this way in which um, people are tired of fighting alone, and people want to know that we are not just being neighbors, but that neighbors are also being neighborly with us. And so I believe if we are going to defeat this, it is going to be all of us examining ourselves, saying that we will disrupt all of the conditioning that we have that perpetuates a fraudulent notion of human hierarchy. Authoritarianism succeeds because we believe the myths.
So, first off, thank you. And I always believe, and it could be that I'm married to a rabbi, but I always believe faith has a role. I always I get prickly when people think that when we fight for public education and we say public education has to be pluralistic, that, you know, it doesn't mean that we are anti-faith. Many of us are very pro-faith and very much, you know, go to Sunday school and then have, you know, public education. So thank you so much for all of that. And I think that all three of you, and I know I could go on and on and on, but I also know it's a school night for people, so we're going to go to, I think, 9:15 or so. You have all kind of answered a lot of the questions that I have written down, but also that we have been getting from our audience participation. But I do want to ask each one of you, I do want to ask, I think I want to target this one to Erica, and then I definitely want to target something to the Reverend, and then Yvonne, you talked a lot about youth. So I want to target a general one, but actually ask you to answer first. And if there are things that I'm missing, feel free to answer the question you want to answer instead of the question I'm asking, because the three of you are steeped in such expertise. I feel very incompetent in even asking the questions. But Erica, you said a few times about, and your research has shown that nonviolent movements are more effective than violent ones. And that, and I don't remember if it was you, I think it was you who said something about, but all of these movements, sometimes there is some violent episode. But what would your advice be? Because I can see already this huge nonviolent movement is going to actually be defamed as violent. And, you know, it wasn't on April 5th, but we're already starting to see some of the extreme right making some of these suggestions when we were planning for nonviolence. So give us a little bit of advice of inflection points we need to watch for, interventions to meet people to constructive nonviolent actions, and frankly, am I asking the right question?
Thank you, Randy, and thank you so much, Yvonne and Reverend Gould, as well. I think maybe I can respond, Randy, just with conveying a particular sequence of events that took place in Nashville during the desegregation campaign there. So one of my mentors was Reverend James Lawson, who was like a pillar of the civil rights movement, and who at the time was a young minister who was organizing in church basements, preparation and training for people to learn how to engage in non-cooperation and actually do sit-ins in lunch counters and stop buying from department stores where segregation was taking place, and basically to completely withdraw their cooperation from the system of segregation throughout the city. And it was known that in doing so, there was going to be violence visited against people. And so they would actually do role playing to prepare people for the emotions of that and the physical experience of that and the embodiment of that and the ability to maintain their own agency and nonviolent discipline when that happened. The movement also did a lot to prepare for collective nonviolent discipline, not just for individuals, giving them the spiritual, moral, emotional, and physical resources for that, and the sort of advanced preparation and the sort of theory of nonviolent action that was necessary for them to buy into being willing to take those risks. But they also did collective action preparation that allowed them to respond to like deeply terrifying incidents of white supremacist terrorism against the movement in strategic ways. So, for example, there was a lawyer in town named Alexander Luby who was a Black lawyer representing many of the students who were being arrested, not for committing a crime, but for simply sitting in lunch counters that for whites only. And so students were increasingly loaded into the back of police vans, taken and put in jail, never charged with crimes, because it wasn't a crime. It was just not allowed, right? So Alexander Luby was representing them, and his home, his family home, was bombed by the Ku Klux Klan. And in response to that, the movement organized a silent march from his home to the steps of the city hall. And thousands of people joined the silent march. Why is that significant? A silent march is a highly disciplined event. It is very hard, or it's very easy, I should say, to know like who might be a provocateur at a silent march, right? And the silent march conveys a total clarity about which side is lawless and which side is going to take a totally obvious moral fight right to power. And they confronted the mayor, West, Diane Nash, a Black student from Fisk University, went right up to him and said, Mayor Nash, or Mayor West, do you actually believe that it's morally right to discriminate against somebody who wants to buy something here on the basis of the color of their skin? And you know what? Standing in front of 5,000 people who just come in a silent march with a microphone in his face and the camera's rolling, he said, no, I don't believe it's morally right. Right? So
Wow.
like that in that moment, like, you know, in the background, there was a negotiation. The negotiation was that the signs would come down and the department stores would desegregate. There wouldn't be a public announcement of it because they were worried about white supremacist retaliation to the entire downtown business district, but it functionally ended. And
Wow.
and so like there was a sequence of events that just demonstrated the lack of the total like discipline on the part of the movement because they had prepared, and it took a long time to prepare, and people who knew what they were doing, right, and who could inspire that level of discipline. So I think I just tell that story to convey the capacities that I think we do have in our we can do that, right?
Yeah.
But would need to do it, right, in order to
Yes.
be prepared for the types of violent episodes that might be visited upon people.
That's really helpful and such a great story. And what I also want to do is Kelly Booz, who runs Share My Lesson, and Mary Catherine Bricker, who runs ASI, Albert Schenker Institute. I think we should actually do a lesson. We've done lessons about Bayard, for example, and about the March on Washington, but I think we should do a lesson about Jim Lawson and just his, just his, role in.
So just so you know, because she said she thinks she needs a lesson on that, Your kids will be learning it. Well, they have been learning it this semester because they planned that last late spring. This is from May 2025. As you heard them, let's do a 5-year anniversary. Think this Weingarten helped create the document of the election coup, right? Where they were talking about a federal coup. This is how brain dead most of them are. And she's married to a rabbi, but she goes to Sunday school. You got to be listening to these people. But what's important is what Ivan has to say in regards to things.
Teaching so many of us about not only nonviolent protests, but the why it is so important. It's, obviously Gandhi, obviously Bayard, obviously Mandela, obviously others in history have had a huge footprint, but Jim Wilson has had a huge footprint as well. And I'm so glad that you raised him, Erica. I want to ask um, Reverend Gould. This is you just talked about the long game, but the erasure that is going on right now of the movement for freedom and actually having real freedom for in America for the people who are I could say black and brown, but let me just say black. This level of erasure right now, the making words like diversity, equity, inclusion bad words. This investigation of Brandon Johnson for talking in a church about legacy and the promotion of people of his faith and people who are African American. I am stunned. I am stunned by it. So the question I have for you is, what are some of the lessons from our history that, like, how do we deal with erasure? And how, I mean, Erica, I think, said, or maybe it was you who said, or maybe it was Yvonne who said the words outrage and faith, outrage and I'm sorry, outrage and hope. The question is, how are you helping people deal with the complete outrage of being erased?
So again, it's a recurring theme. Um, what you have now is just someone who gets on the 5 o'clock news, it's on social media, and etc., that actually reminds people that there is the legislated, although illegal, uh, through the power of the executive branch, that they are going to attack. But we now that I keep reminding people, don't use this kind of rhetoric around we've been here before, because some people haven't. But black people, we've been here before being erased, right? We've been here before. It actually, there's probably more times that we have been erased than we've not been erased, right? We're only talking a 50 to 60-year period when people were actually acknowledging the work. We had affirmative action and we had the Civil Rights Bill because of hundreds of years of erasure. And so the outrage has not changed for us. It is just now that people are like, oh, what, this is like crazy. And I think a lot of the frustration, let me use my I voice, because I speak for Cassandra, not all black people. We're not a monolith. The frustration and the outrage that I have had, that some colleagues have had, has been, well, like, has my microphone been on? Have we not been telling you that this is what we have been dealing with basically every day of our lives? And suddenly now people are like, oh my God, this is really bad. It has been really this bad. And so the lesson is a Harriet Tubman lesson. It is a lesson that will not be broadcast on webinars. It will not possibly even be said from pulpits, not when everybody is listening. It is that people are preparing and working in ways that they've always worked. Not all of the things in the civil rights movement. Selma was also on Bloody Sunday. It was a silent march. It was a silent march protesting the death with impunity of a young black man. And so we know the risk that our bodies and our lives are under and have been. So when black elected officials are attacked or there are intimidations, it is not new. It is not the first time we've lived through death threats or any of that. What we really need in this moment are enough accomplices that will say this time you will not go by yourself. And so my real hope is that we will move from the mobilization is great because it captures the energy to actually organizing. Organizing is a long game. That Nashville worked a little faster, but it had been a long arc to get there. Bloody Sunday, some more people had to be killed and injured and etc. before it was like, oh, okay, wait, we got to do something different here. And so it is there are tactics that will have to be, as Gil Heron Scott, the famous jazz musician, said, the revolution will not be televised. So it does not mean that people are not outraged because you don't see them outside with you. People are working and doing what they need to do to keep themselves and their community safe and to continue to build alternatives, which is the work that Black folk have always done.
Thank you. I am told by our folks, if you all can do it, I'll go another 5 to 7 minutes so I can ask this question of Yvonne. I hope, and if people have to drop off, I totally understand. But let me ask this question of Yvonne, which I promised. The question I want to ask is how we sustain movements when people are scared, disillusioned, or burnt out. But what happened in Serbia, frankly, Dr. Gould, what has happened here, and Erica, I should call you Dr. Chenoweth, but you're the examples that we see are examples that happened over a long period of time. Solidarność happened over a long period of time, for example. Chile happened over a fairly long period of time. But how, in Serbia, Yvonne, how did you sustain that movement? How was it? How did the young people actually sustain it over the long term? And what advice do you have in terms of, and I'm going to ask the other two of you as well, when people are scared or disillusioned or burnt out? I think Dr. Gould actually answered some of it, but I think it's an important question to ask.
Yeah, the question of sustaining a movement over a longer period of time is key, because every how shall I say, uprising starts with a protest and with people pouring into the streets. That's my experience. I cut my teeth in the student protest. We were marching every day in the streets for 4 months. For 4 months every day. And after that, we were the ones that were exhausted. Our parents were the ones who were begging us to stop and to go back to studying. And we didn't hurt the regime much, because protests, although they're visible, they do create a lot of energy. They do create a lot of enthusiasm. They are not.
Okay, here's where you need to listen. Know thy enemy when you know thyself. Listen carefully to his words.
Think compared to other tactics of civil resistance, such strikes and boycotts and things that 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 do hurt the either the economic baseline or the support that the regime has. So for us, it was important to move beyond protest. So in a sense, the whole idea of building a movement is to prepare for what Reverend Gould was explaining as the long game. It's actually a fight, a struggle that is going to take years and in some cases even longer. That means the tactics that we select have to be much wider kind of repertoire than just protest. That is a very costly tactic for activists, and tactics such as strikes and boycotts and social boycotts and economic boycotts and there are different types of strikes as well. There is a kind of like a regular strike, but there is a slowdown strike, and there is a like a wildcat strike, and so expanding the repertoire was key. But another thing was also important was for us to actually build those tactics in a sequence so that it makes sense. It creates and increases momentum over time. There is a big problem in growing too fast. Growing too fast as a movement means that you don't have the ability to absorb all the people who want to join the movement. There is a danger of disillusionment, a danger of too high hopes that cannot be met. So it is important with increasing those numbers also to increase the capacity of the movement, to create, Erica was talking about parallel institutions, to create different parallel institutions that actually can transfer that mobilization into staying power. So in a sense, there is a lot of strategizing that needs to be done. In our case, that is exactly what we were doing. Between that student protest, where we kind of started with student activism, when we were given a space by the independent trade union where we could meet after that and we could strategize, over the next year or two, we were slowly building that movement in order to kind of get to the point where we can have that peaceful transition. So I would say expanding the repertoire tactics and moving beyond just protest as probably the most visible, most popular, but not maybe the most effective tactic of nonviolent action.
So it's 9:22 Eastern time. So I want to put all three of you back on the camera. And I want to just, as I hopefully keep on being really grateful to all three of you, you can tell my eyes are tired because I'm wearing my glasses. I just want to, I was going to ask as the last question, but you've shared so many tangible strategies already about the labor movement, about hope. I love this. I'm going to keep on using it. Hope and outrage, about things like silent marches and what kind of vehicle those can be, about the long game, and having some grace for people about the long game, because this is not new, particularly for our brothers and for our Black brothers and sisters and siblings. And frankly, it's so you've shared so much. So I want to just ask the following question kind of as a closing. I was going to ask, as I said, share another concrete, tangible strategy. A lot of us are teachers. We like very tangible things. But what, as you're thinking in the last hour, I wish Randy had asked this, or I wish I covered this. What's kind of like the closing remark you have in this first of, frankly, many of these workshops that we do to really exercise our muscle or create our muscle for democracy and against autocracy. And this time I'm going to start with Reverend Gould. And I'm going to end with Erica.
Say if there is one thing so even for people who are in the streets, I hear there's, when it's this president's birthday, folk will probably be in the streets doing some counter activities. Flag Day, don't just get in the streets without actually having follow-up. And follow-up is not an invitation to the next march. Follow-up starts, the lifeblood of organizing is one-to-ones. 90 million people, 90 million registered voters did not show up at the polls. 90 million. We don't have a whole answer to that because we haven't talked to all of them. But the sense of isolation, being unheard, unseen, and etc., not just by parties, but also by those of us who engage with voters, is real. And so someone has to build and be the bridge to actually go and start to talk to people, to actually disrupt the isolation and the polarization that is happening and in real time in community. So what does it look like to get, 5 or 6 people together and stay connected to those, get 5 more, and you're actually engaging people on an ongoing basis, and you're listening to what's happening in their community, and you're finding an issue that you can work on together. Everybody can't come to DC, but there are things that are trickling down in our own communities that people have the opportunity. So this is how you fight that, that hopelessness, that powerlessness, that people can find something really quick. Non-indictment after the murder of Mike Brown, 4 years later, we go back to the young people in Ferguson who had never voted because some of them were not old enough to vote. And we talk to them and ask them, what do they want and what do they need? They want to be safe. They want to be able to get home just when they're walking down the street. And we literally help them to actually build a C4, let me say that, campaign so that we were able to get rid of a 27-year incumbent prosecutor for a young Black man who's now in Congress. But it was the people power, because we organized the people and we recognized, because you can't protest forever. As Ivan said, you'll just be exhausted and the empire will still be doing the empire. And so we have to have tactics, economic boycotts, and other tactics that actually change something for the empire and actually shifts the power for the people.
Thank you. Yvonne.
I would just say that, apathy and disillusionment, it will kind of always kick in. But, I want to offer like a word of hope, apathy and disillusionment, they come and go. As long as the underlying injustice is there, we need to, how shall I say, keep faith that people are going to come back to the movement, even when they're kind of, if they're losing, because movements are kind of having those like sinusoid up and down waves. And, I was talking about, movement growing too fast. And there was a question in the Q&A, can a movement recover from growing too fast? Yes, of course. I mean, there is a phase where it grows too fast and then people get, either there is a disillusionment or there is like a downward trend. But the underlying injustice, the underlying issue is still there, and people are going to come back eventually. And in a sense, going back to what Reverend Gould said, it's a long game, and we have to be strategic about it, and to kind of be able to ride the wave when it's going up, and also to use the wave when it's going down, to re-strategize and to prepare for the next phase. And that is how these how should I say, movements actually operate. This is how they change over time.
And last but never least, thank you both of you. Erica.
Yeah. So I was thinking one of the things that comes through a lot of the scholarship on backsliding is that there are very few, if any, cases where people power movements have succeeded without building something kind of extraordinary, which is some kind of, in South Africa, they call it the United Democratic Front, and other places they call, umbrella organizations of civil society, where it's like thousands of different parts of nonviolent, autonomous civil society decide to do something together, right? Which is to say, we're going to both push back on the authoritarianism, and we're going to begin to lay out the process of taking the country to actually a new and better place, right? And so the sort of the negative coalition of the no, we're not going further down, we're not going down, and also the yes coalition of, and here's where we can go together. And so both of those things can happen at the same time and in parallel. They're sort of parallel lines of effort. But what I would say is that
people in America time tonight, but you can see a lot of love here. You can, I was having that same exact conversation with a former attorney general literally 3 hours ago about how we do that and how we envision it, but also how we do it in a way, as Reverend Gould said, that people who have never had it feel like it's real. And in a way that we capture the imagination of youth, which is what you did, Ivan, in Serbia. And so part of this is, I can't thank you enough. We, the AFT, and I have taken far too much of your time tonight, but you can see a lot of love here. You can see it in the questions that were being asked in the chat. I think a lot of you actually were also engaging in responding to some of the chat, which I loved. And, we are committed to this work for, and it feels trite to say it, a more perfect union, understanding full well that, that words have to be combined with actions and with intent and with a sense that we are in it for everyone, not just for ourselves individually, which is what, frankly, most of our members who make a difference in people's lives every single day try to do. So I want to just do two kind of quick takes here, or two kind of call to actions. One is, I mentioned No King's Day, which is June 14th, which is also Flag Day. And it is the day that the president is throwing himself a multi-million-dollar military parade in Washington, D.C. for his birthday, as he's cutting billions of dollars of aid for people in America. Now, let me be clear. We have to honor the service of our veterans and active duty service members on Flag Day who pledged loyalty to a constitution. We want to make sure that we honor them and not have this pitted as the president is honoring the veterans and we are not. But I don't think that that's going to be a problem, because veterans all over this country, Flag Day was about fighting tyrants, was about fighting kings, was about fighting fascists, and it was honoring them in terms of the end of a war. And so on Flag Day, on No King's Day, on this mass protest, as the president is having his military parade, there are over 100 organizational partners already, over 800 events already scheduled, more hourly. Find one near you, start one on your own, bring friends, make handmade signs, bring some fun, and it's important that we are on the streets visible for one another and visible for those who don't feel like they can speak for themselves. The other thing I wanted to raise today is you saw a form. And on some ways, I am reminded, and maybe it's because this story is how I start my book, Why Fascists Fear Teachers. It's a story of paperclips and Norwegian teachers and what they did to try to stop the Nazis. And what and they did this in schools all throughout Norway and in a community as teachers in a community. And so I want to actually go back to that form. Let's go back to the other slide. That there may be some of you who say, yeah, I want more of this. I want to hear more. I want to understand more. I want to be more engaged and involved, like all of us are saying. Apathy, Yvonne said several times, apathy is a real enemy, even more of an enemy than fear. And so if there is an interest that you have or that your local has in terms of this Democracy Defenders campaign, I'm not sure that that's going to be the full name or the only name, but if you're interested, please, please, please fill out that form. And I just want to say again to our panelists, I just can't thank you enough. Every one of our panelists, just like every one of the people who are listening, they are doing this work, this justice work, this democracy work all the time. And so for them to be with us today and spend this much time and prepare in the exquisite way that they did, I'm just really grateful. So on behalf of our 1.8 million members, on behalf of those of us who are committed to fighting for a more perfect union, a more just union, a place where there is opportunity for all and dignity for all, a place where people have real voice and agency. I just want to say to Erica Chenoweth, to Yvonne Marovich, to Reverend Cassandra, Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really, really appreciate you. We thank you for your work and thank you for your words. Thank you.
I had to leave that in its entirety. This goes back to Sun Tzu. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles, right? And this is why we watch them. Not out of obsession, but out of necessity. As you could see, like I even have a tiny violin and I don't have it here, but I'll bring it so that I can have it on the show and show to you. Like I play this tiny violin by myself. I listen to them, I record them, I follow them. It's important because movements that call themselves nonviolent resistance are rarely spontaneous and rarely innocent, okay? Because the way they organize is how they shield themselves. And what you just saw is the level down about the No Kings protests back then, which there's even more from 2024 and even more from early 2024. This is from 2025. So we've been following them for years. Their language that they use is camouflage. And money, it's the kind that flows quietly through foundations and NGOs. That's their weapon. Now, when you understand this, you start to begin to see patterns. Panels like the one we just saw aren't random gatherings of academics and activists. They're training grounds. Each phrase, each framework, you saw it yourself, each call to civic engagement is an encoded signal. Instructions on how to mobilize, where you sign up, the document she was referring to, I have all those. How do you destabilize things? The other guy who's living in our country on a visa in Virginia is claiming that we need to suffocate our own economy in order to topple the regime, meaning President Trump. Most of what they do has to stay above board because that's how they maintain legitimacy. They rely on legality as a cover. But if you listen closely, you'll hear the glint of what they really mean. what they plan beneath the language of democracy and justice. That's why I even filed my amicus, because these are not isolated academic theories. They're like coordinated strategies, and they echo across borders and elections. Now, we see it every day in the funding streams, and we saw it together, the funding streams that targeted the lawyers and legal challenges, how money weaponized to silence, intimidate anyone who questioned the approved narrative, which is what they're saying is happening to them. It's the same playbook that once dismantled regimes abroad is now being refined for domestic use under the banner of defending democracy. So, yes, I watch and listen, and a lot of you should too. And we should be taking notes, because understanding them isn't paranoia, it's preparation. Knowing how they think, how they move, and how they build the optics of righteousness while concealing the mechanics of manipulation, well, that's the first defense. As Sun Tzu also said, all warfare is based on deception. Ergo, and the first step in piercing deception is obviously observation. Now, as I watch this, I think, in our lives, we're told that armies win wars, the Mard soldiers with the spears. They lied. Steel will rust, borders will shift, and presidents will end up being a face on a currency. But an idea, now any idea, that can actually slip through barbed wire. While the steel rusts and the borders bleed, we've got ideas that slip through like a breath. It hides in a child's whisper, in a meme at 3 a.m., in the pause before someone hits share. No drone can target that. No algorithm can bury it forever. I've seen the strongest idea of all, and it isn't power, it isn't mind. It's freedom. Not the freedom to hoard, but the freedom to give. The freedom that whispers, your pain is my pain. Your child's laughter is my inheritance. But see, they've packaged even that. They sell freedom like a brand, a flag, a gun, a tax cut, or a hashtag. Shrink-wrapped revolution. All ego, no empathy. And look at the feeds that you get. Every post, a mirror. Every, take a throne. We resist for the photo now, burning villages just to prove we're the loudest echo in the ashes. And love. You know what's funny? Love never trends. It doesn't ratio, it simply is, right? It's quiet, stubborn, unmonetizable. And yet in the age where truth actually scrolls like static and lies come with push notification, love is the only root system that doesn't rot, right? Because egos build walls, love builds bridges no one asked for. Ego shouts, I was here. Love whispers, you're not alone. And that's what we're lacking a lot of. And that's why I watch them. Not with hatred, never that. With eyes open. They move in daylight now. Their slogans wear halos. They speak of justice while negotiating power of democracy, while choreographing obedience. Most of what they do will stay, like I said, above board. That's how they stay untouchable. This is why it's important we listen. Because in between the lines that they spit, you would just hear that hum of the machinery turn. And like I said, the amicus I file is never to attack, but to document, to mark the pattern before it calcifies into law. Because once you see the script, pretending you didn't is complicity, completely. But again, love is the answer. It always is. It keeps your hands clean. And when the world tries to make you strike and attack and get on your back, it's what lets you stand in a storm without becoming the lightning, right? And so if you can imagine this, a society so deafened by noise that the gentlest act becomes a revolution, not a march, not a slogan, just one person carrying the stranger's groceries without filming it. One person refusing to dox the enemy because the enemy has a mother. One person planting a garden on the rooftop of a foreclosed building and leaving the gate unlocked. See, those are the type of ideas that outlive any bullet and any war. Selflessness disguised as survival, love weaponized as a refusal to hate. I mean, many will call it naive. Let them. Naivety is just courage that hasn't been shamed yet, okay? And when all the servers crash, when the lights die, when the last influencer finally disappears into the quiet, the actual ideal will remain. Walks barefoot through the dark, hand in hand with strangers, with nothing but conviction that freedom isn't complete until it belongs to everyone. That's the only revolution they can never live stream. They can't censor, they can't kill. Because in the end, love, real love, outlives it all. Absolutely everything. Now, I'm going to end tonight and I wanted to tell you something. So, you know, the Serbian that they have, that Ivan guy, right? Well, he's obviously in the United States with a visa and he's working. But I wanted to bring your attention to another Serbian. May I do that? See, when you see this, then you'll understand why I showed you Ivan and why I advocated it. So, your right wing, right? Your right wing also worked with the Serbian. Go figure. He worked with the Oath Keepers and elements involved in January 6th, like Ali Akbar and other. His name is Alexander Savic. He's not Ivan or an Optor figure. But his story is highlighted in the media as a bridge between Serbian protest tactics and American right-wing militias. So he was a Serbian nationalist and a conspiracy theorist, also born in Belgrade, Serbia, just like Ivan. And he was with the far-right circles in Serbia, including anti-government and pro-Russian sentiments, right? But unlike Ivan, Alexander promotes narratives of stolen elections and foreign interference, often mirroring QAnon-style theories. And so you have to think, wait a minute, but Ivan also talks about stolen elections, but it's only stolen when it's not the left. Now, Alexander in 2020 emigrated to Texas, where he sought asylum. He claimed prosecution in Serbia due to his activism. I don't know how many of you believe that. So he's like Ivan, but for the right wing, right? He was actually known for posting videos in 2020 drawing parallels from Serbia's 2000 bulldozer revolution that Ivan was talking about, that Ivan actually partook in. And he actually helped dispute the 2020 election, the same stuff they did in Serbia. This is like I said, the operations being conducted in our nation right now are the operation we conducted overseas. These are weapons of mass destruction. Because without a bullet, like Ivan said, they overthrew Milosevic. Obviously, the poison from Russia kind of helped too. But you guys have to understand that not only did they overthrow their government, right? But they also aided in genocide during those periods of time. So this isn't something new. This has been conducted overseas for decades, fine-tuned and perfected. But as I said earlier, they have to fix it so that way it looks above the belt. That's a problem that we have. And we have a lot of people that listen to one thing they say and go, rah, here it is. Look at them planning. That's not the plan. No Kings actually was first talked about in 2023 in a video. So it's not new. That's why when I tell you that the No Kings video that Alex Jones, who's on life support right now, right? That original video discussed in 2023 was was done at a high level and then trickled down to the other affinity groups and landed on the idiots. And like I've said, Roe, the USAID, former USAID chick with her weird husband, she goes everywhere. She was doxxed, so she just goes to give validity to the groups that are not that important. So all the reporting you saw last week from these people that were like, gotcha, and George Soros, it's like, no, it's not George Soros. So you got to take a step back. Because now you're bullshit. Oh, I found a connection. Bitch, you did not. Because we're in there. We know where they're getting their money from. I already told you guys too. So we have them organizing crimes, you guys. It's not like whatever. But the question is, why have these foreign nationals, one on one side and one on the other, kind of like counter. See the playbook? And I might add, I'm really disappointed in the way people are behaving against Marjorie Taylor Greene. So you may not like what MTG says, but because the president said something, now you're going to run with it and cause her harm and mock her. You did love her a year ago. You loved her when she gave you airtime too. But now, because you don't feel it's part of the whole package discussion, you speak of her that way. Oh, that's where you know where operators and amplifiers in. So I have to get going. I got a package today, so I'll show it to you guys. I don't wear a lot of makeup, so but I got this in the mail. It's calamine and niacinamide bubble foaming cleanser. Can't wait to try this because I always use an oil cleanser. So on that note, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. You should be listening to them. And fingers crossed on Tina Peters that she's eating turkey at home. You guys, we just have to wait, okay? We have to wait. God is here. He's within you, and he's doing what he can. I will start doing more of my TikToks. I actually did one while I was live with you guys, just to do it behind the scenes, and I'll upload it where I was showing off my handbag of the day. But I will start, doing that more because it kind of, it's kind of fun. I'm hoping that we do some fun TikToks because Terpsy's grandma's here. So we're going to go to some seafood boil. So we're going to get dirty. So we're going to wear gloves and a bib. So I'm off to do that. I think I'm late by 10 minutes, but it's fine. I'm working on putting together an article that I haven't completed yet that I think is necessary in regards to the UN. As I said at the beginning, I'm extremely concerned with the World Food Program, and I'm really hoping that, I'm watching the moves. This is not good. And we've never not had an American. On another note, I'm finding that the Greek media is eating Kimberly Guilfoyle for lunch. She's cute. She's having fun. She's surrounded by a bunch of hot Greek guys. Of course, she's going to go out and go to games. She's very personable. So it's kind of funny. I wanted to tell you things that I think you should know for today. Give me a second. Because I've actually listed them. Let me see where I put them. There it is. So one thing is people are starting to turn the rhetoric against Trump, saying that he has a Hitler-style assault on BBC. This is where he needs to pull Amy Harris out of his hat. So because they're saying that a leaked memo, reported that Trump and political allies in the U.S. and the U.K. coordinated the media narratives and legal threats aimed at BBC, which I think is bullshit. Another tragic story comes out of an Air Force veteran, which I found horrific in Detroit. They found his remains that were stuck in a mail sorting machine for 6 to 8 hours. And that came 10 days after this Air Force veteran. His name is Acker. He was 36 years old, proposed to his girlfriend, and his girlfriend, he didn't come back after work. So she was calling the U.S. Post Office and no one saw him leave the facility. And then they found him dead. It's not being treated as suspicious, but he was in the machine. One thing that I'm concerned about is the PetroChina. I don't want to talk about it now. I'm actually writing about it, but the PetroChina project that's right now going on in Iraq is something that is concerning to me, especially with the thorium. But like I said, I'm writing an article on that to keep it simple. Right now, the only thing we're pending is next week we have a big election case. We'll talk about it after the fact. So I'm excited about that. Actually, the attorneys are excited too. So fingers crossed. Mayfield City High School don't have to respond till the 28th of this month. So I'm waiting on that. And my personal lawsuit with the apartment building that wanted me to pay next year's rent up front, even though they told me I had to move out. I'm still waiting on that. So what else? And I'm hoping that what I filed on Friday will help all of these attorneys, kind of clear their names that have been, made to look like, they were planning to deceive the government. I think we need more talks of that. There's a lot more stuff that I could have put in, but I wanted to keep it simple and I wanted to introduce that evidence, and more so to hone into the judge. Hey, they did this before 2020 elections. Before 2020 elections. Republicans didn't even think of responding to anything until after the elections. So this is a very big deal. It shows one was really confident and said, this is what we got to do if this happens. They had contingency plans, and the Republican Party and those attorneys came together after the elections, right? So that was key. And I wanted to make that a point because I wanted to give enough to the Department of Justice, who is uniquely positioned right now to target Media Matters, Mark Elias, Project 65, and these fucking attorney generals that are still pursuing a case using state taxpayer dollars on this shit. They're getting paid for this shit. They're wasting money, taxpayer dollar money, on cases that should never been in the court in the first place. So those are the things I wanted to say. Nick's got her good bill of health on Friday, so she's doing great. We're stopping the one medication. Today she went to her groomer, Ashley. We got to try to trim her down. So she looks okay. Biscuits being a 19-year-old bitchy cat as always. I'm ready to go get dirty with some seafood boil with my auntie. And I have travel next week because of the case and some other stuff. So I'm excited about that. I know I should be going to Texas soon. Geez, I can't even find tickets that are even remotely close to being normal. When I said people with means are only going to be traveling, I mean it. But I guess with the shutdown, maybe they'll fix something. Who knows? There'll be an update on the election case. On the day of the election, I will send the link where it's going to be live streamed on YouTube. And I also wanted to say, we did put out a film challenge. And I'm not seeing a lot of people wanting to do a film challenge on something that has plagued almost everyone, which is influence networks. So I find that very curious because everyone is always in it, right? And wanting to showcase. It's the people doing this. And I was really, really hoping that a lot of people would have taken heed and answered the call. But it seems like, that topic is not something people want to discuss. And actually, BBC is MI7, but that's a whole other topic. But, I don't know why nobody wants to partake in an influencer, project. I'd really like for you guys to partake. This is where you make your mark in history. But I still say it's extremely curious how nobody wants to talk about influence operations. Because we've seen a lot of them on Telegram. We still do. So it's pretty interesting. Maybe people don't want to write an autobiography. Maybe some people were, entrenched with some of these influence groups and didn't know they were influence groups. Well, then go through that, say it through that lens. Tell the world your story of how you see it. Because as I said before, influence operations or psychological operations are weapons of mass destruction. This is how you destroy a society. So again, now then okay, Terpsy just said, yes, come on, let's go eat. So I've got to go. Peace out. I'm going to put my favorite creation of a song. And I actually wanted to share somebody else's, but I'll rip it and share it. I found a really, really good song about blackmail, but I'll share it on my next show when I'm back from the lawsuit. Please pray for the circuit judges because this is like super key. So, and for those of you out there, I urge you to participate in these. Again, if you had partook in influence operations and didn't know it, or you did and then you realized it's an influence operation, or you were okay with the influence operation, but then you thought how dishonest it is because it's actually an influence operation, and just how dangerous they get and how obsessive they get. These are all things that I'd love for you guys to see. So please join in on this challenge, because I find it extremely odd that when we're entering realms that actually affect us and our discourse online and understanding information, people back down. So that made me curious. So on that note, have a fantastic evening. Maybe I'll pop on tomorrow, or maybe tonight, late night when I come back. Maybe I'll do get unready with me when I put on my PJs, and do a TikTok or something. Well, something. We'll see. So on that note, be diligent and remember, just love more. And I know it sounds really hard to do in this world today, but I think having a little bit more, I don't want to say empathy, but love for the person that you know could have been. How's that? Peace out, guys. Good night.
Those who spread and cheer a chasm among their brethren dear. Can you not see the beam in thine own eye before casting judgment from on high? In God we trust, let this be our creed, to build bridges not walls, to plant love seed, for in the embrace of unity we find the strength to coexist, you see. Instead of seeking peace, you summon strife. You revel in chaos, you crave the fight. But there is but one race, the human race, and in unity's light lies our true might. In God we trust, let this be our creed, to build bridges not walls, to plant love seed, for in the embrace of unity we find the strength to coexist, you see. You see. Let us lay down our arms, our words of war, and seek the path of peace once more. For every soul a brother, a sister. In the grand tapestry of life we are all but one. You serve the schemes of those who profit from discord, from turmoil, from endless pain. But united we stand, divided we fall. In unity we shatter the chain. In God we trust, let this be our creed, to build bridges not walls, to plant love seed, for in the embrace of unity we find the strength to coexist, you see. You see. God in watch from above, guiding us with the wings of love. They whisper peace into our hearts and show us how to mend our parts. In God we trust, let this be our creed, to build bridges, not walls, to plant love seed. For in the embrace of unity, we find the strength to coexist, you see. Together let us heal the wounds of a world torn by needless feuds. For in the light of love's embrace, we find our true and sacred place. Together let us heal the wounds of a world torn by needless feuds. For in the light of love's embrace, we find our true and sacred place. In God we trust, let this be our creed, to build bridges, not walls, to plant love seed. For in the embrace of unity, we find the strength to coexist.